11:23 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Monday, October 21st, 2357, Arturo Memorial Solar Array. It was actually pretty impressive, that old armor. It was less a suit as it was some sort of exoskeleton. Solid straps clasped around my joints and electric-powered pistons connected them. A huge transformer on my back tied everything together and connected the array of mechanisms I was wearing to a 2-inch thick cable that tied directly into the stainless steel sockets on the wall, spaced every couple dozen yards. The entire system was painted a matte black and buzzed with hot electricity. I picked up my left foot, and the machinery responded in kind. I could feel it take the weight off my leg and shift the center of gravity over my right leg, forcing the mechanical boot I was standing in into the floor. The white paneling cracked. "Don't worry," Jacob said, noting the surprise on my face. "We have extras." I shifted my weight and took a step forwards, ducking out of the storeroom and into the hallway. I was careful not to break the panels on the floor as I took my next few dozen steps, until I reached the point where the cable was taut. I stood straight up and tried to balance the suit as best I could. Gregory unhooked the cable from the wall behind me, picked up the end, and sprinted the 24 yards until the cable was taut again. There he put the end of the cable into another wall plug-in, and I continued walking. We repeated this cycle as I broke more of the floor, and made my way back to auxiliary storeroom number 3. Once there, I walked into the gray, cold room and clomped over to the first stasis chamber. Drevin had already gone ahead and detached it from the wall, and with a flick of a switch, it turned 180 degrees, exposing 2 thick handles on the rear. "Take hold of these and carry this to your ship." "Got it," I said, and clasped the 2 metal extensions. The suit gave me 100 times my strength, and I picked the 3,500-pound stasis chamber off the gray metal floor, turned, and navigated carefully towards the door. The transformer whined, pushing near maximum current. I was worried it would overheat, but it didn't. Many careful steps and several broken panels later, I made it to Devereaux's door. Sarah had already taken the proper precautions and supplied more than enough power to the outer edge of the pier. Darren and Alec ran cables from the grounding station to the very edge of the city, ready to couple the metal and glass enclosure to our power systems. I let the container down as softly as I could and turned to go pick up the next one. Gregor was scrambling for mats for me to step on, as they were not sure how many extra panels they had, and did not expect them to be so fragile. I made the trip back to the storeroom, grabbed the next pod, and carried it to Devereaux. I then repeated that 4 more times, until we had all 6 lined up in the hallway, just on the other side of the docking port. I carefully wiped the sweat from my brow as we congratulated ourselves on our accomplishment. I ducked through the docking port once more, so that I could pilot the suit back to where it started. As I disembarked from the black, powerful framework, a sense of relief washed over me. We had all the stasis pods, safe and sound. These 3 good men were guaranteed a job with us, and there were no complications. I trotted back to the docking port in a good mood. When I arrived, however, that happiness faded. Jacob was waiting for me. "There's UNSC coming over here, Admiral. You might want to scram before they see you. That is, if they haven't already." "Is it a routine patrol, or what?" I asked. "I can't say I know. My best guess is they're coming to make sure we done our job with them their corpsicles, spat 'em out into the sun." "Not what I would have hoped," I sighed. I backed across the threshold into Devereaux, saying, "Wish us luck, then. We'll be seeing you." The door slid shut, and I bolted for the control room. "On dock! On dock!" I shouted as I ran up the stairs. "Aye, on it," was Darren's reply. "We need to get the hell out of Dodge before the UNSC gets here. Spin up the drives, Alec. Get us an exit vector on the double." "Yes, sir. Plotting course." "I'll be in the chair room piloting us out of this mess." But before I could turn to run, Nick's little voice stopped me. "Ellis, we're being hailed." I muttered something profane under my breath and turned to face him. Put it on screen. The double-sided view screen popped to life and a man, probably no older than 25, came on screen. He was no doubt a greenhorn, maybe not even a captain yet. His voice was as weak as his appearance, not childish, but inexperienced and not at all forceful. "Unidentified starship, please, identify yourself, or I've been authorized to use force." "Look, man, I don't want to start a battle here. In fact, I'm leaving." I was trying to stay calm and collected. "Identify yourself!" His voice was shaky. "I have 200 Archer-guided missiles at my disposal. You will identify yourself!" I turned off my microphone and turned to the doctor. "If they fire, wait until we're hit, and then fire back. 2 drones. Just shake them up. No major damage, no casualties." I turned my mic back on and turned back to the camera. "I'm telling you, I don't want trouble. You can inspect whatever you want after we've left. Your solar array is fine." At that moment I noticed that was probably not the best thing to say. "That array is UNSC property. Vessels require a pass to dock with it. You have left me no other choice but to fire." The connection was cut. I wondered if, though he had seemed to become more sure of himself the more he talked, he truly thought that he could damage Devereaux. No matter what he thought, Alec quickly reported that 20 Archer missiles were streaking towards us. I made the decision to abandon the conversation and run to the chair room, virtually eliminating any further chance of negotiation. "Arm the drones!" I shouted as I ran down the stairs. I heard the doctor object as the doors to the transporter sealed, and I zapped down several stories. Due to Sarah's upgrades, the chair was already active, and I did little more than sit down. But instead of the city's hologram appearing over my head, there was a targeting display. The tiny Fezzik-class frigate in my sights was old even to that era. Designed in 2303, it was now relegated to security duty in a system well within the UNSC's confines. Despite its age, however, the hull showed few signs of wear. This was one of the few things that made what I was about to do easy. I targeted the thickest armored portions and waited. One unlucky missile impacted what can only be described as a pebble and exploded halfway to us. The remaining 19 solid-fueled missiles flew true and slammed into our Atlantean shield. The damage they did was negligible. The 2 yellow points of light then flew from their port on the north pier, exited the shield, and streaked past the solar array that we had just left. They broke formation and flanked the enemy ship. They pounded the titanium armor, leaving 2 near-identical craters on opposite sides of the ship. What followed was an eerie silence. "Sarah, send them data burst about us. Nothing big, just who we are and why they shouldn't have wasted those Archer missiles on us." "All right, done. Now let's get out of here." The time drives filled the air with yellow energy, and we left without further incident. As morbid as it sounds, there was little to do now but wait for the array workers to die. 11:22 p.m. Mabel's time, Thursday, April 15th, year 947, Mabel's Cafe. Time is a strange thing. While it had been 2 days for us, Drevin had survived almost 150 years. Even stranger was the fact that of all 3 of the array workers we were waiting for, he was the last chronologically to die. In his time, he'd worked until the old array was uselessly outdated. At that point, he was given a promotion, and was changed to a sector of the UNSC dealing with the infrastructure on newly colonized planets, but was killed 15 years later in an accident involving a malfunctioning orbital elevator. As the magnetically accelerated cart plummeted downwards out of control, I was pounding up the stairs towards Mabel's cafe's control room, convinced that our elevators would not get me there in time. I stumbled into the main chamber, a large oblong room where we kept our ace in the hole when it comes to time travel, what's called the Variable Time Portal, or VTP for short. Using the console in front of it, one can calibrate it to any event in time and space, limited to our universe only. This being said, it has downsides, such as the fact that, without anyone to guide you back through, it's essentially one way. The portal is invisible from the other side, and unless something, a hand for instance, or a rope, is poking through, it's almost indefinitely small. This is to save power, as it is an expensive device to run. It is directly and permanently linked to one other identical device, but it is believed that there were more during the time of the 4 races. As the design was a collaborative effort between the Alterans, the Asgard, the Furlings, and the Nox. It was the Doctor, however, that advised them on its creation, and convinced them to add a time travel aspect, even if it was only to a single gate. The gate itself is not square, rectangular, or even circular as other Alteran gates are. It's closer to a triangle, a craggy shape, unique to each gate. The shapes are the only way to tell them apart, as most of them were functionally identical. The only other difference is that each gate's console has mounted on it a plaque, stating the Stargate address at which the gate can be found. When I stepped up to ours in order to tune it to save Drevin, I noted that it had none. Mabel's Cafe, being out of the normal universe, is not within the range of any Stargate. I gave the console a set of coordinates, and it found the planet we were looking for. This was the fledgling world where Drevin had been working, planning out the infrastructure for a civilization to be built. Being more precise, I navigated the portal opening to the base of the orbital elevator's tethers, and began shifting it upward against the pull of gravity, hoping to catch Drevin's doomed cart along the way. I didn't. My view soared all the way to the space station which the orbital elevators were attached to. When I got there, all I found was an empty cart. Suddenly struck by the notion that perhaps I was too late, I started to get worried. While I had neither seen nor altered the event I was looking for, I had still put a hole in time and space close to it. My training told me that if I had tried to correct my mistake and looked at the area earlier, I could upset the universe's delicate balance and begin breaking down the timeline. To my immediate relief and surprise, however, the cart's doors slid open, and the familiar but aged form of Drevin Arrow, Skyfall, stepped in. With an alarm bell and a lurch, the cart began its fateful descent. Without warning, my apprentice appeared at my side and suddenly made a dash for the VTP. "I'll go get him!" Nick shouted. Also appearing out of nowhere, the Ninth Doctor grabbed him by the arm and stopped him. "I'm on my way out," he said. "Seriously this time. You won't be seeing me again." He released a half-hearted sigh, combined with a laugh. "But I thought I'd drop by one more time and save the universe by allowing our friend here," he gestured to Drevin, "to release the final version of a cross-feed fusion reactor to the UNSC shipbuilding facilities on the planet Reach. If you had run in there, Nick, he may not have sent that email. That reactor went into the Pillar of Autumn, allowing her to keep the Covenant busy for long enough for Noble Team to deliver a fragment of Cortana to those same shipbuilding facilities and upload it to the Autumn. My catching you is now the only reason that humanity discovered the Alpha Halo and survived the Human Covenant War. Do you see how patience can be helpful?" Nick solemnly nodded. I looked very carefully through the VTP and noticed Drevin tap his tablet once, and then put it away. "Now," the Ninth said, "we go get him." Nick and I walked through the portal, leaving the Doctor behind. After us came the end of a rope, which we would use to get back in. Drevin was naturally surprised at our appearance, but recognized me instantly, and understood at once while I was there. It has been a long time, Admiral, though, based on your looks, time has not acted the same on you. He sighed, collecting his thoughts. Is this truly where I meet my end? Unfortunately it is, I replied, preparing to take him with us. Hold this. I handed him the recovery rope. You lived a long time, Nick stated. Drevin was about to reply when the elevator cart suddenly lurched and began picking up speed. We just passed a section of bad magnets. This cart is basically doomed now. This is how I die, I suppose, Drevin said. And this, I gave the rope 2 sharp tugs, is how you cheat death. The rope suddenly went taut, and we were yanked through an invisible hole. While the Ninth Doctor had disappeared, off to go on his last journey, there were plenty of TTO senior staff and members to warmly receive and quickly indoctrinate Dreven's Skyfall Arrow into our organization. 2:46 p.m. Mabel's time, Friday, April 16th. Year 947, Mabel's Cafe. The following day I was hanging out in Mabel's arcade, trying my hand in a Halo 4 tournament that some of the other TTO operatives had cooked up, when the ghostly form of Mabel's hologram tapped me on the shoulder. "We have a match for Jacob Wretch in an obituary from 2399. He was 81. I jumped up and was about to make a break for the door when I realized that I was still holding my controller. I walked up to Nick, the controller outstretched, and placed it in his hands. "Nick," I told him, "aim for the head." And then I took off. "What did he die of?" I asked aloud, knowing Mabel could hear me. "Lung cancer," came her omnipotent-sounding reply. "Dying from cancer in the 24th century doesn't just happen. What were the complications?" "According to the medical records, it appeared and filled his lungs within 2 weeks. He was suffocated by the tumors before they were able to create replacement organs." "Okay, so that's the first step. Have the medbay synthesize new organs for Jacob." "We do not have proper medical records. No DNA found for Jacob Wretch." "Okay, then we need that. We'll get it from him." I thought for a moment. "Preferably when he's alive." I stepped into an elevator. "I need dates, specific dates," I called as I walked out into the control room. A few console operatives at their stations around the room began helping Mabel sift through archives and records. It was easier than it could have been. We had a relatively specific date and a correct name. Mabel always goes ballistic when the name of a person in fiction doesn't match their actual counterpart. "I've got something," someone called moments later. "Head on through." The VTP shifted into a scene of Jacob coughing, sitting on a bedside. I didn't know where he was, and I didn't particularly care, but I tied myself up to the recovery rope and prepared to jump through after him. I lingered for just a moment, however, to make sure someone else first called, "Timeline check is sound, pull out is a go," and then I dove in. Compared to the last time I had seen him, he was a helpless mess. Jacob Wretch, an ancient, weathered human being, looked up from his bedside and wheezed my name before descending into a fit of coughing. If my information was correct, he had only a few minutes before he would pass out, and later would suffocate while unconscious. What an unfortunate way to go. He tried to take a step towards me and collapsed under the floor. I grabbed his hand and began to pull him towards the portal. When I finally yanked him through, he was unresponsive. Thankfully, someone had already sounded the alarm. A team of medics arrived on scene in seconds and carted him off to the medbay, on a stretcher. I untied the recovery rope and let the spring-loaded spool pull it back, and wind it up. "Good, quick extraction, drop it in the logs." "On it," someone replied. As I turned to vacate the room and keep track of Jacob, I received yet another tap on the shoulder. "We have a match for Gregory Thelms, an Irish Mafia record book." I would not have expected someone like him to be in any sort of mafia, I said, remembering his friendly and openly helpful demeanor. I spun another 180 degrees and returned to the recovery rope, picking it up. He was not part of the mafia. He was the hit. That phrase resonated in my head for a moment, and I stood there, dumbstruck. Dropping the rope, I sighed, "Prep recovery team. We're going in hot." The VTP stayed on a freeze frame while a special recovery team was assembled. These weren't high-profile people, but they were well-trained, versed in stealth operations, and while I wasn't one of them, I was with them. I donned black clothes, checked my holster, and marched out of the locker room with the armed recovery team. "You're clear to head on through," was the call as we walked purposefully towards the VTP. "All right, guys," I said. "Let's go." I took a breath and stepped through the portal. The bullets were flying when I came out of the other side. 10:42 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Wednesday, November 19th, 23:57, Chicago. Note that should be Central Standard Time. I rolled behind a crate as the rest of the team tumbled through the invisible opening. I moved again, as that crate was torn apart by gunfire from the hit squad. We were in what appeared to be a warehouse, with storage containers of all kinds creating makeshift walls. It was late at night, and the hanging lamps didn't provide much light. Gregory was nowhere to be seen. The 4 special ops men that were hunched behind a pile of all sorts of wooden and metal boxes, across the corridor from me. The hitmen hadn't seen them yet, so I motioned for them to move around to the right and flank them. As they moved out and turned the corner, one of the lead hitmen walked right by where I was sitting, calling Gregory's name. He didn't see me. I quietly raised my DE.P shocker directed energy pistol, set it to stun, and fired. A jet of blue electricity jumped from the tip of my gun and leapt into his body. He convulsed and fell onto the concrete floor. 1 down. God knows how many to go. However, my display was more than enough to attract the attention of at least one of the other hitmen, who I could hear thumping down the corridor towards me. I turned and ran, diving behind another wall of boxes. Knowing that he must have heard my movements, I silently turned another corner, stupidly paying more attention to the possibility of him being behind me than to what I was walking into. I looked back to check where I was going and found myself face to face with another of the Mafia men. I fully expected him to have a shoot first, ask questions later mentality, but he paused for a moment, just to stammer, perhaps wondering why a kid dressed in black, certainly not their target, was hiding out in this warehouse. That moment was all I needed, and I raised my weapon and shot him in the chest. Mouth agape, he keeled over, face first. Fearing more footsteps behind me, I spun to see a third enemy round the corner. This time, the electricity went straight into his knee. He yelled. If they didn't know where I was already, they did now. Shouts of, "I see him, and let's get him!" echoed in the cavernous roof, and the only thing that ran through my mind was, how many of these guys are there? That's when I realized they weren't talking about me. 2 men and a woman streamed past my position towards the back of the warehouse. I leaned into the corridor, aimed, and almost fired, when someone said, "Gotcha." I looked up and realized at once that I had been duped. That was only a distraction. I counted 8 Mafia operatives standing on the crate around me, all aiming rifles somewhere on me. One jokester had a laser sight on my crotch. "Drop your weapon." I complied. The prototype pistol clattered on the floor. I raised my hands, but was fully prepared to go into my shoulder holster for my H-Class 6.2E magnetic accelerator pistol. "You mind telling us what you're doing in here?" I opened my mouth to answer when they started dropping. Zetnikitel and Wraith stunner fire appeared from all sides. In their moment of panic, I snatched my weapon off of the floor and sprinted out of their encirclement towards the rear of the building. The ones who I aimed at were not merely a distraction. Of the 3 who passed me, one was a woman. There was no woman in the complement of hitmen that surrounded me. Then I heard gunshots. Not Zat or stunner shots, actual gunshots. I burst through the back door and onto the quay behind the building. The cold November air hit me like a slap in the face, but I brushed it off and kept going. The 3 I had seen had just shot out a lock, and were now proceeding through a door, following Gregory down into Chicago's freight tunnels. I continued to run after them and turned the corner into the doorway as one of them reached to shut it. We locked eyes for a short moment and I shot him in the chest. Without time to react, the man in front of him was stunned and on the ground before he could turn to face me. But as he collapsed, I spotted the woman aiming a pistol over his falling shoulder. I tried to duck out of the doorway, but I had already taken a step down the stairwell. In my panic, I tripped and landed on my back. My gun flew from my hands and skipped along the concrete quay. The woman towered over me, pistol aimed at my forehead. Then from down at the bottom of the stairs, a familiar Irish voice piped up. "Ellis? Sis, don't shoot him, please." "Shut up!" She shot back fiercely. There was venom in her voice. "You put a stain on this family name. You don't deserve to govern me actions." I stared at her blankly for a moment, all fear gone. Even through her fury, I heard the Irish accent. Govern me actions almost had me laughing. It probably would have if she hadn't had a gun pointed at my face. And it was then I realized why there were so many people to take down one man. It was personal. "I'm gonna end your friend, and then I'm gonna end you," she spat. "Ready, little man?" She cocked the hammer back. 3, 2... "Don't!" Gregory cried. 1! His sister spun around and fired. Gregory screamed and crumpled onto the ground. She turned back and squeezed the trigger again. A Wraith Stunner blast screamed over my head and pounded into her chest. I grabbed her by the arm so she wouldn't tumble down the stairs, catching her falling gun with my other hand. After setting her down lightly, I sprinted down the stairs towards Gregory's apparently lifeless body. When I got there, I noticed a string poking from the wall. With no time to waste, I strung it through the recovery loop on my waist and passed it to the 4 operatives that followed me down the stairs. After grabbing Gregory by the arm, I gave the rope 2 tugs, and we were dragged back through the VTP. A medical team was waiting. 6:16 p.m. Mabel's time, Friday, April 16th, year 947. Mabel's Cafe. Thankfully, a medical team was not needed. He was breathing heavily, shocked and panicked from his near-death experience, but not dead. The bullet had missed his head by inches. "What the hell happened to you, man?" I asked. He stared blankly at me and then began to settle down. Okay, he chanted, taking deep breaths. "There was a hit called on me." "That much we know. Can you tell us why?" "Right, well, when that frigate finally docked with us, you know, the one that shot at you, they came on board and saw the stasis pods were gone." "Obviously." "But we hadn't had time to fake the records, saying we jettisoned them, and they accused us of selling them to the insurrectionists. It was crazy, really, I know, and Jacob tried to save us, but when we went in front of that board of admirals, he had to make some compromises. He was forced into retirement, sort of. Drevin, at least, was put back, thanks to Jacob's sacrifice, and I was, released. But even though the UNSC had dismissed it, I was still haunted by that rumor. My family believed that I had sold those stasis chambers to the insurrectionists. Well, they didn't have all the information, but they still thought I had done something to the enemy for my own benefit. Then they called the hit on me. They said I was always the bad egg of the family, that I didn't belong." Gregory began to break down into tears. I put my hand on his shoulder in a comforting gesture, saying, "You know what? That's fine. You belong here. You're part of my family now." "Really?" His face brightened. "Absolutely. Welcome to the TTO, and welcome to the crew of the timeship Devereaux." In the end, flash clones were used to replace the people we took. You may remember this if you read the Halo novels. It was the same way with John and his compatriots. They used flash clones to replace them, although these were already dead. Gregory was found in the freight tunnels, supposedly shot by his own sister. Scary enough. Jacob was found in his cabin, suffocated by tumors. And Drevin's body was never found, buried in a heap of rubble at the bottom of the orbital elevators. His designs, however, lived on. And because of the work he ended up doing, oddly enough, he became some kind of legend. I'm not entirely sure of all the facts, but there are notes of a man named Skyfall helping in the Human Covenant War, helping in the Human Klingon War, the Human Romulan War. If you look deep enough, you can find it. It's sort of like the Doctor. He became the stuff of myth and legend because of what he started to do. And it was a good kind of wake he left. The Doctor, you always hear he left death and destruction in his wake. That's because he always came at death and destruction and created an end from it. Drevin did the same with words. He created ends with words. It was fantastic to watch him. The actual people did continue to prosper, as I just mentioned, but Gregory Thelms joined me for many years on Devereaux. After that, he found his calling teaching history and working as an archaeologist. He went on to find a third variable time portal in the rubble of the Asgard homeworld. There are still 2 more to be found. We've yet to understand precisely where they are. Driven Arrow was de-aged and trained under Ambassador Spock for 3 months before going off on his own. He later negotiated a treaty between the different sects of the dissolved Covenant, adding them to the Federation. This was long after the Human Covenant War. Jacob Retch was de-aged, cleaned of cancer, and went on to be a medical technician aboard the Daedalus. Later, he underwent an experimental procedure to cure his colorblindness. It was successful, and he trained to become an F-302 pilot. And that's the end of the men who bargained for the universe, yet they do not end. They've lived on. This was just a brief look into the TTO as a whole, our organization, and what we do for a living and to save life. Sometimes the decisions aren't always easy, the situations are quite unusual, and not every day goes so well. But I will be back next week with more of the Admiral's musings, and I'll talk to you just about how bad some days can be. In fact, that's going to be this title of next week's episode, Bad Days. There are a couple that I can note, dealing with radiation, handcuffs, replicators, and all but the occasional gunshot. And then there are those times where it's not the other people that get you upset, it's yourself. And that is one of the primary themes of Book 3 in the main trilogy, which has only had its surface scratched. But that's something I need to talk about on another day. Until then, those of you that think you can make a difference in the universe, and those of you that can't know that you can, keep staring out at the stars. Maybe we'll come for you someday.